you
Chris will
in your
start.
beautiful picture. So welcome to our monthly call. We have Daniel, who's going to bring some wonderful wisdom into our lives, courtesy of Thich Nhat Hanh and his new book on climate and climate change. So we will enjoy that. And then next month, I've been working on a book on change and what nature and regenerative systems could teach us about how to lead systems change. And so I'm going to talk about that next month on our regenerative call on the 21st. And then Chris is on the 19th. Also, all of these are at 1 o'clock, is going to share some great work that he's been doing on building a leadership model. Maybe you should talk a little bit about that, Chris.
Oh, yeah, right now. Oh, thank you. Hey, yeah, I just completed my master's program and my thesis was around a nature-based leadership model to really interweave living systems into a leadership development framework. And actually, beautifully, Kathy offered that we're going to get rid of the word framework and model, which is kind of a colonizing kind of languaging, into design. So it's going to be a leadership design structure. So you're going to learn about that leadership design and how living systems interweaves with developing ourselves as leaders and as individuals. So I'm excited to share that in July. Thanks.
So that said, we're going to pass this off to Daniel and prepare to be wiser at the end of the hour.
Oh, thanks. No pressure, right?
No pressure.
You can all fill out a survey. Do I feel wiser? Well, thank you. For those who don't know me, I'm Daniel Lawse, Chief Century Thinker at Verdis Group. We do sustainability and climate action planning and implementation across the country. And today's topic is Zen and the Art of Saving the Planet. This is a very near and dear topic to myself because I came to this work of sustainability and climate action really from this background of relationship and how do we heal the relationship between people and the planet. My undergrad is in theology, and I was fascinated and dove deeply into like spirituality, mysticism, world religions, and social justice. And as I got into this work of sustainability and healing the relationship with people on the planet, there's a very practical hands-on thing, right? Identifying opportunities, identifying strategies to get there. And it's a lot of head sustainability, but for me, there's always this piece that's what I call heart sustainability. And it's been woven into mindfulness with me for over a decade now. With my own practice, going on 7-day silent retreats, having my own meditation practice of silence and stillness, and trying to bring these together. So I was thrilled when Thich Nhat Hanh, his nickname is Thay, T-H-A-Y, so I'm going to say Thay to save some word space, came out with this book last October. I was just thrilled beyond measure because it's a lot of his words and teachings that weave together this approach of connection and relationship and deep looking and deep listening in the world. So I want to just kind of share with you a primer of the book so that you can orient yourself and a few key concepts. We don't have time to go into all of it. Like I found myself reading 3 or 4 pages and then feeling like I needed to go for a walk and process. So we're going to touch on a few things, but I'll give you some of the designs that are laid out here for us to think. And it's broken into 3 sections. It's broken into a section about thinking. How do we think? The middle section is about acting. What are some core actions that we can take or ways of being in the physical world? And then the third section is about community, because this only works well if we do it together and have people alongside us. And so it starts with this premise of fundamentally, and this is very much a meditation perspective, the only thing that we can change is our mind. I don't technically have any control of the outside environment, of you all, right? The living system principle that living systems can't be controlled or steered. They can only be nudged or attracted. And so this idea that if I really boil it down, the only thing that I can change is my mind, it presents an interesting question for us. How am I thinking today? And how might I change how I think? And this idea of meditation fundamentally is looking deeply and seeing things as they are without all the stories in my head or without attachment or without kind of pushing away things that I don't want to hear or see, and just seeing things as they are. So when we practice silence and stillness and begin to look deeply, we then start to have shifts occur. And one of the things that we notice when we look deeply is literally the beauty of the earth, the beauty of the people's faces that we see. Today, I walked into work about 3 miles, and the sunlight, that morning sun coming through these new green leaves and illuminating these leaves. It's seeing the beauty of the birds and the animals and the plants around us. And when we actually make space to look, we can't help but notice the beauty that surrounds us. And then zooming out and seeing these connections of the food systems that feed me, that I'm consuming plants and animals, I'm breathing in air, I'm drinking water, and just understanding this beautiful web of connection. When we actually pause and stop, we can see that and experience it. On the other side of that coin, when we pause and look deeply, we see suffering. We begin to see the suffering in ourselves, the suffering of others, and the suffering of our planet. I mean, you're all on this call, you know at least many things that are going on that are challenging with the planet, right? From climate change to pollution to the 6th mass extinction. I'm sure that you could probably rattle off a few ways that you might be suffering in your life, whether it's from grief and loss, or from challenges, or feeling stuck. And you probably can relate to grief of those that are close to you, and even those that you might not know, but you read about in the news. Our planet is full of suffering. Life has suffering. And when we look deeply, we see that. And if we have the energy, which probably all of us do at least some of the time because we're on this call, we want to act, we want to take action to relieve that suffering for ourselves, for others, and for the planet. And so by taking this unique approach of changing how we think, it changes how we relate, and it actually can bring us more energy, more connection, and we can create change in the world. So this paradox that I've wrestled with meditation for years is kind of like, well, just go meditate more to get clearer, to look more deeply. And in that process itself, you're changing the world. Even though some people think meditation is retreating and running away, you're not actually practicing meditation if that's what you think it is. Mindfulness is being fully present to what's in front of us, even the hard stuff, the joys and the sorrows. And so as we look deeply, I'm going to share these 4 notions that we can let go of, or in Thay's framework, he says, this comes from the Diamond Sutra. Maybe some of you are familiar with this teaching, Buddhist teaching, the Diamond Sutra. It's called the Diamond Sutra because it's like taking a diamond sword and chopping away, cutting loose things that we, mental ways of thinking that we hold very tightly. So these might be challenging for you to hear, but I invite you to hold an open space as we hear them. When we cut them away, it, by its nature, makes us want to change how we act. So the first notion to cut away, to cut loose, is the notion of an individual self, which sounds a little crazy, right? Because we all refer to ourselves as I do this and I do that. But what if you paused for a moment and said, I'm a continuation? Like quite literally, you're a continuation of your parents and your ancestors, your blood, your DNA. There's a very physical continuation present. You're no longer just you. You're connected. Yourself is, when you breathe in, you're breathing in oxygen that some other plant gave off, that some other human maybe breathed in and breathed out. We are connected to everything. We are not just a self. We are constructs of our communities, the people we spend time with, the cultures we're immersed in. We are not just ourselves. And when we recognize that we're made of elements that are not human, right? We have iron in our blood. You take the iron away, we don't exist. You take the water away, we don't exist. We are not just a self. The notion of the self cut it loose. And to kind of use the living systems framework, we've talked about critical shifts on past calls. And it's this shift from thinking of ourselves as separate to being deeply connected. In fact, one of the words used in this book a lot by Thich is interbeing. We inter-are with everything. There's a mountain in you. Do you see? There's a river in you. Do you see? Do you see the cloud in you? And when we begin to see that we inter-are, we know that when we are harming other species, we are harming ourselves. We shift the relationship from subject to object to we inter-are, subject to subject. And even just, there is no subject to subject, it's us. We are the earth and the earth is us. As I was walking into work this morning, a phrase that comes out of this book is, we are the earth walking on earth. And when we stop and look deeply, we see that. But so often our minds are so full and so busy, and we're consuming and filling up, that we forget that we are the earth walking on earth. So to care for the earth is to care for myself, and to care for myself is to care for the earth. So another notion to cut away is the notion of the human being. This is similar to the notion of self, right? But the human being is not something that life looks at distinctly. The human being is made up of all these other elements that are non-human. And when we make a distinction between the human being and an animal, or the human being and the plant, or the human being and minerals and water and nutrients on this planet, that's a false notion, because we are all of those things. And we strip away any of those elements that make us, and we don't exist. The human being only exists because of the relationship with all elements on this planet. We are stardust. We are the cosmos. And the other thing about this notion of the human being, we are actually one of the youngest species on this planet, yet we walk around thinking we're the boss, and that everything is here for our service. And it's not at all true. I mean, what other species also want security and prosperity, and, if you will, happiness, right? And yet we think that we can claim happiness and prosperity and safety and security at the expense not only of other humans, but other living beings and other non-human elements. So what happens when we strip this away and recognize we're all interconnected? We don't feel like we can use and exploit. It changes this frame of relationship. And some of you might be familiar with the term deep ecology. Deep ecology is one of the things that Thich is talking about. When we recognize that we are these elements, we are the earth and the earth is us. When we harm the earth, we harm ourselves. When we deplete the resources, we are depleting our ability to live. And when we take care of ourselves, we're taking care of the earth. The third notion to cut loose is that of a living being. We often distinguish between mortal and immortal, distinguish between sentient and non-sentient. And so even in living systems, we call it a living system, which is interesting to me, because living systems, we often are talking about the biological aspects of life, those plants and animals and insects that are alive, because they're the ones adapting and evolving to their environment. But this notion says, cut that away too, and include the environment, include the elements of rocks and minerals and water, of stardust, of the elements in the air. All of these things are connected. We inter-are. And we also distinguish so oftentimes between mortal and immortal, and this idea that immortal is this holiness, or there's this sacredness around immortality. A lot of cultures and religions hold this. And so when we think about, what if we let go of that notion and we see the sacred in everything? I don't know what faiths or sacred practices you hold, but if you hold nothing, perhaps you can relate to somebody who, when they're on hallowed ground, there is a deep, deep, deep respect. What if every step we took, every person we interacted with, was as if we are interacting with the sacred? Every step is on hallowed ground. What if we meet the next person we see and know that they are sacred? There is no distinction between mortal and immortal, so cut that notion away. And the final notion to cut away is the notion of a lifespan. And this notion of a lifespan reminds me of the shift from short-term to long-term, and that change is the only constant thing in life. So how long is a lifespan? I think the average lifespan is around 80 some years, 60 to 80 years. But in this way of thinking, the length of a lifespan is one breath. You're a different person than when you started and joined this call 20 minutes ago. You're a different person. Quite literally, you have different atoms inside of you from the breath that you just took to what you have right now. So when we recognize the impermanence of everything, this nature of change, that change is always happening, what shifts will we have? That we are a continuation of all of our past actions, and the actions that we have today will create spaces and environments and consequences in the future. It's quite empowering that we're new and fresh every moment. It gives us the ability to have hope that even though we have challenges and suffering right now, that we can make choices today that will change the trajectory of that. So those are the four frames or four ways of thinking and notions to cut away, cut loose that the Diamond Sutra teaches us. That reminds me of those critical shifts of living systems from separate to connected, closed to open, inert to living, and short-term to long-term. I want to wrap this up in a few minutes, so I want to glance over a couple things. So as we change how we think, there's actually three aspects of action. The first aspect of action is that of thinking. The second aspect of action is that of speaking. Words create worlds. And the third aspect of action is the physical manifestation of doing, physical action. And so when we change how we think, it changes how we talk, and it changes how we act. Now, there's a lot of research that says you can't just teach something an idea and expect them to change their behavior. While that holds true, every action you've ever taken started with a thought. Every word you've ever spoken began as a thought. So there is a connection between these pieces of thinking, speaking, and acting. And actions have two kind of fundamental pathways. One is healing or regenerative or life-giving, and the other is harmful or degenerative. And so when we think about the actions we take in our thoughts and our words and in our physical manifestation, we can begin to ask ourselves, is this harmful or is this healing in our actions? And that happens at the very microcosm of literally what I'm doing today to what we're doing at our systems level. And when we talk about regenerative leadership and we talk about regenerative systems, are we moving towards health and life-giving, right? Life creates conditions conducive to life. That's a life-giving, healing action. Or are we creating harm? Are we creating an environment that cannot support life in the future? So thinking, changing how we think can lead to how we act. And there are 5 ways of acting, 5 ways of living that Ty talks about in the middle part of his book. And then I'll wrap this up and we'll move into small group discussion. One is nonviolent. When we change how we think, we cannot harm. When we look deeply and see deeply, we cannot harm ourselves or others because we're harming everyone and we're harming ourselves. There's a whole bunch of detail under each of these, but I'm just going to skim the surface and I think you'll get the concepts. The second way of living is deep simplicity. This isn't a simplicity of depravity. This is a simplicity of when we know that we are enough, that we are connected to the immenseness of the universe and to all things that we are. We don't need to cave into the consumerism that's driven through marketing, that you'll only feel good enough once you buy X, Y, or Z, or consume this much, like the banquet table. I've got to consume it all, right? When I know I am enough, I can live a deeply simple life and be quite fulfilled and happy and have security and prosperity and happiness. The third way of living is the right fuel. This is the right fuel for our bodies. This is about inputs. What are we bringing into our lives? And not just from a food and nourishment standpoint, but the quality of the water. Is it polluted? The quality of the air. And this is about the mind. Are we guarding our mind from the negative influences, from those degenerative or harmful thoughts that turn into words? Are we nurturing our aspirations? So when we think about these 5 ways of living kind of as a value ladder, when I get thrown off, because I'm human, I'm going to get thrown off. Am I nurturing my ability to come back, teaching myself to come back and be like, oh, you know what? I didn't practice nonviolence in what I just said. I'm going to change that. I'm going to ask for forgiveness, apologize, and come back and fix that. So guarding your mind, nurturing your aspiration, nurturing your body. The 4th way of living is brave dialogue. This is really about the power of listening. When we listen deeply, we gain understanding. And when we have understanding, it breeds compassion. So I have to say this because, it's one thing to think in theory, but Thai literally was in Vietnam during the Vietnam War, and he was meditating and teaching and doing nonviolent action and trying deeply to understand both sides and practice nonviolence for both sides. So he has lived this, and he still writes in this way of, we can listen deeply and we can have compassion for everybody. So think of maybe just because we're in a somewhat divided nation right now or a divided world, think of somebody on the other side that maybe really rubs you the wrong way. Could you sit and listen deeply to this person? Could you see beneath what they're saying and understand them and what they care about and what their desires are and what their fears might be and what inspires them? And if you did that, might you have a little bit of compassion for their suffering? And could you do the same thing with people that you agree with and look underneath all of the ideas that you say, nod your head, oh yeah, I agree, you're preaching to the choir here. What's underneath that? What's the suffering? What's the joy? And can you hold compassion for these people? And this, I'm going to read a quote because I didn't know this until I read this book. Christina, I don't know if I'm going to say her last name right, Figueres. She was the architect of the Paris Climate Commitment. She's been a student of Thai's for many years. And if you all know, the Paris Climate Commitment was a very difficult thing to arrive at. They tried, I think it was in Buenos Aires a few years before, fell apart. And she was able to listen deeply and meet all these different delegations from countries who were fossil fuel dependent to those who were very ecologically minded and help craft this global agreement for reducing emissions. And this quote comes from the book. Christina calls herself a stubborn, grounded optimist. For Christina, optimism is not about anticipating a certain outcome, but about choosing the kind of energy with which we enter the challenge of the climate crisis. It's not about the result, and yet, as an energy, optimism will of itself change the result. There's a profound interbeing between ends and means. And it goes on to talk about how her practice of mindfulness and meditation gave her the stamina and the ability to return when she would get thrown off, to hold these really deep conversations, to listen, to understand, and have compassion for all of the parties coming together for this. And the last component of the 5th way of living is true love. And true love is made up of 4 things. So I'll just read these and you can apply them to your own life. But it's loving kindness, friendship, and companionship. So it's showing up from this place of kindness and companionship. It's compassion, which at its essence is the desire and practice of helping relieve suffering, even just a little bit. When you truly love someone or something, you want to relieve suffering. Another component of true love is joy. Is this relationship, am I bringing you joy? And the 4th piece of true love is inclusivity. It's a love that benefits everyone. And there's this beautiful parable in this book that when we practice these 5 ways of living, we expand our capacity to hold the world. to experience the joys and the beauty and the suffering. And when there is suffering, we have the space to hold it. So imagine a bowl of water, and I take a handful of salt and I throw it into the bowl of water. It's going to get pretty salty and not taste great and not nourish my thirst. But if instead of a bowl, I am a river of water and I throw a handful of salt into it, there's enough space for all of it to be dissolved and not have an impact. So can we nurture ourselves through these ways of thinking and ways of living that create more space to hold the suffering of the world with compassion? And in that act of compassion and living in these ways, what changes? When we nurture ourselves, recognize that we are the earth walking on earth, what changes? And the final section of the book is about community, which there's some beautiful stories in there, but in essence, like, we can't do this alone. Why do we come together once a month to talk and share ideas and be together? Why do you go break bread and share meals with friends? Our people around us help hold us accountable. They help bring me back when I get thrown off. They help relieve some of the suffering I experience, and I do the same for them. So it's a beautiful book. If you haven't read it already and you're inspired by some of these concepts, I invite you to, but be prepared, like, read a few pages and process it, because it's deep and profound. So I'll stop there and turn it over to Chris, and he's going to set us up for some discussion.
Well, first of all, thank you, Daniel. Beautiful. Loved your passion and your joy in sharing that, and the smile that was on your face, and how you paused and found moments where you were connecting into what you were sharing. So beautiful, beautiful modeling. And it's just nice that sometimes for us to talk not only about what's happening out there and in the world and how to create change, but what's happening in here inside of me that also impacts the world. So it's just nice to feel that, the full range of what we're talking about here, from the deeply intimate and personal to the global and universal. So thank you. All right, everyone, we're going to go into our breakout groups that we're commonly do on calls. And so the question that we've come up with for the breakout groups, pretty simple. And this is of what you've heard as Daniel was sharing. And I actually put some notes into the chat. I can't remember if the chat carries through into the breakout room. I think it does now. Of what you've heard, what most landed for you? So in a way, what piece was sort of most impacted you? And so, and you can speak to a couple of pieces, whatever, but what really, really landed for you? And then the second part of the question is, how might that inform your choices or actions moving forward in your life or in your community or in your business, your organization? So what most impacted you, and of that you're sharing, how might that inform choices and actions going forward? So that's that. We've rooms are basically 4. I think there's one room of 3, but 4 folks. So Daniel, Kathy, 20 minutes. Do we want to? Is that what we've been doing? 20 minutes? Okay, great. So you'll see I've set the countdown timer to 20 minutes, and then we'll come back and maybe do some shares and wrap up. All right, everyone, have a beautiful breakout. We'll see you in about 20 minutes back in the main room.
Thanks, Chris.
we're the first ones back.
There we go.
Oh yeah.
Sally, what brought you from Nebraska to St. Paul, Sally?
My husband and I, we decided Nebraska wasn't really for us anymore. And so we were looking for a change, but we knew we wanted to stay in the Midwest. And so we, thought the Twin Cities might work, and luckily both found jobs up here and made the leap.
Well, welcome.
Thank you. Thank you.
Have you-
So far, it's been good. Yeah.
Good. Despite
Beautiful
the tornado.
state. Yeah.
So did they continue the breakout rooms?
I had to hit a button, and then then it took us out, but they still have 30 seconds. So they're everybody else, because I'm the host. So here they come.
Right.
Yeah.
No
There we
problem.
go. Hey, welcome back, everyone. Welcome back. I think the final room is coming. Here we go. Everybody is back. Wow. Great. I don't know how that was for all of you. Our group was very rich and deep and thoughtful. So I guess we have 3 or 4 minutes. I would love to anybody feel like sharing, just a brief share would be really beautiful. So who would like to share either something that you shared or something that came up in the group that you were in? And feel free to chat. We've been doing this, and people kind of like this too. Feel free to type stuff in the chat. Just this, we'll all read that as well. But would love to hear a voice as well. So who would love to share? I could call on my group, one of my group. Marianne, do you want to share? Simon, do you want to share?
Well, I'll offer up a quick thought. A couple thoughts I had was, working with people in positions, leaders, official leaders, et cetera, and leadership training. There are people here where this would be very cutting. This would be out of their natural scope of way of thinking, way of being. And yet then I have like my 30-year-old son this is exactly where he wants to be, I think, because the planet is falling apart. It's whatever the reason, so it was very powerful. I was struck with the 3 aspects of action, and I've done some recent teaching on adult learning and then overlaying experiential education on that. And I would just add the component of reflection, and then you experience, you reflect, you analyze, and you apply it, and then you experience some new, so it's right there in terms of engaging all 4 parts of the brain and adult learning. And so it's very cool.
No, thank you, Marianne. Thank you. Anybody else from another group?
I learned 2 phrases that I had never heard that I think I'm going to play with a little bit. We're talking about energy, and the phrase, the energy of being dismissive and the energy of resistance, and looking at how much they actually cost us, even if we're thinking we're conserving energy.
Yeah, the myth, the illusion is that if you're resisting an idea or an action or a position from someone else, this kind of came out of our deep listening conversation dialogue, the brave dialogues, is that it doesn't take energy to resist, whether it's our own evolution or whether it's somebody that you want to dismiss, but in fact, it always takes energy to hold your position. But we're just not acknowledging that it's draining something from us, probably draining a life force from us.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, thank you.
And maybe we can also share a nice sentence, a concept I have not heard. So bring wintering in. You may all be familiar with it, but it's a bit the tension, the sense of urgency, the impact you want, but also this meditation to slow down, and the silence, and but bring wintering in. I think it's a beautiful phrase.
Beautiful, Frank. Yeah, I like that.
Sharing that.
Is that something that you've heard or that you created, Frank, or what's?
No, I got it from Shimrit, I think. Didn't you brought it?
Shimrit.
Yeah, I've heard it in a couple of places. So Laura Storm talks about wintering, and I think there's a book about wintering by another author as well. I think I may have heard it somewhere else as well. And then the session that Kathy did for Regenerative Women, I can't remember who the person was, I'm sorry, but spoke about the adaptive cycle as well and the idea of winter. So it's coming up in a couple of different places.
Beautiful. Yeah, I like the feeling of that too, using the seasonality, the cycle, and the wintering of going in, more stillness, quiet, bringing that kind of inward feeling of wintertime. Beautiful.
Elaine had a beautiful poem that she shared towards the end. Would you be willing to share that? It only takes about 30 seconds to go through.
Oh, perfect. Yeah, that'd be great. It might take us right out too of the call.
It's by Bonaro Overstreet, a historian. She said, "You say the little efforts that I make will do no good. They never will prevail to tip the hovering scale where justice hangs in balance. I don't believe I ever thought they would, but I am prejudiced beyond debate in favor of my right to choose which side will feel the stubborn ounces of my weight." So when I get discouraged and think that nothing I do will matter a bit, I try to remember that old poem, "The Stubborn Ounces of My Weight."
Thank you, Elaine.
Yeah.
That's beautiful. Who is the poet, Elaine?
Bonaro Overstreet.
Overstreet. Monaro.
Yeah, she was actually a historian. And if you look her up, she's got quite a resume.
And what's the poem?
Type her name. Could you type her name in the, oh, you got it, Chris.
Well, I don't know if is it Monaro? Monaro?
Bonaro, Bonaro. Bonaro.
Oh, Bonaro.
Yeah.
Great.
I typed it in our chat.
Great. Oh, thank you, Elaine. And I know we're right at time. Is there any burning share or request? Otherwise, we'll sign off. And so I'll pass it over to you, Kathy.
It was a lovely presentation to provoke our thinking and expand our thinking and reflect in a more kind of authentic way. So thank you so much, Daniel. And I just love the people who show up for these calls because, we are all on a journey individually and collectively, and we all are bringing nutrients and ideas to each other, and it's a really wonderful thing. So thank you all. And we'll be back next month on the 21st, and I'll share some of the weird ideas that are coming out of my writing process and on change and systems change and nature. And then Chris will join us on July 19th with this wonderful nature-based leadership design for building individual leadership capacity.
And speaking of community, if any of you have something you want to share, we've been doing a good job rotating, or if you don't have something you want to share, but there's a topic you would like to learn more about, we might be able to find somebody to come and share about it. So this is about all of us. So thank you.
Yeah, for August and September. Yeah, put your thinking caps on, either you individually or inviting someone to come and speak. So
this is an example of community, of hanging out in good company with each other. To help imagine another world. So thank you. Great.
Well said, Kathleen.
Thank you.
Awesome,
Thank you,
everyone.
Daniel, as well.
Bye.
Have a
See you
great day.
later.
Bye-bye.
Bye.